My name is Dr. Jonathan Reed. I've spent over 2 decades in internal medicine and metabolic health, and for most of those years, I gave my patients the same advice that every textbook recommends. Watch your carbs, cut the sugar, take your medication, exercise more. But there was one patient, I'll call her Patricia, who did everything right. She followed the diet. She walked every morning. She took her metformin without skipping a single dose. And every time she came back to my office, her blood sugar numbers were still off. Not dramatically, but consistently, stubbornly off. She looked at me the way patients do when they've stopped believing the system can help them. Tired, compliant, and quietly defeated. It took me longer than I'd like to admit to ask her one specific question I had never asked before. "What time do you eat your largest meal?" She thought for a moment. "Dinner," she said. "Around 8 or 9 at night. It's the only time the whole family is together." That was the missing piece, not what she was eating. When? Here's what most people are never clearly told. After the age of 49, your body's ability to manage blood sugar does not work the same way all day long. It follows a rhythm, a biological clock built into your cells. And when you eat against that clock, even healthy food can act like a metabolic burden. When you eat with it, everything changes. In this video, I'm going to walk you through exactly how meal timing works after 49, why your morning metabolism is completely different from your evening one, and what a simple shift in when you eat, not necessarily what, can do for your blood sugar control. I'll give you a practical protocol you can start as early as tonight, and I'll share the number that made Patricia's doctor finally understand what had been going wrong for years. Stay with me, because the third timing strategy I'll share is the one that surprises people most, and it's also the most powerful. Let's start with something called circadian biology. You've probably heard of circadian rhythms in the context of sleep, but what most people don't realize is that every cell in your body, including the cells in your pancreas, your liver, and your muscles, runs on the same internal clock. That clock is set by light, physical activity, and food timing. And it controls far more than when you feel sleepy. It controls when your body is best equipped to produce insulin, how efficiently your muscles absorb glucose, and how your liver decides what to do with the sugar in your bloodstream. Here's the key point. That clock changes significantly after the age of 49. A landmark study published in the journal Current Biology in 2017 by researchers at the Salk Institute found that when mice were fed the exact same calories, same food, same macronutrients, but at different times of day, those who ate during their active phase had dramatically better metabolic outcomes. Their blood sugar was more stable. Their insulin worked more efficiently. Their weight remained lower. The only variable was timing. In human terms, this translates to something very specific. Your pancreas produces more insulin, and your muscles absorb glucose more efficiently in the morning and early afternoon. By evening, that capacity declines. Your body becomes less sensitive to insulin as the day progresses. Researchers call this diurnal variation in insulin sensitivity. And after 49, the gap between morning and evening sensitivity widens considerably. But here's the problem most people don't know about. Your appetite often doesn't match this biology. Many people in their 50s and 60s don't feel very hungry in the morning and feel their strongest hunger in the evening. That mismatch, eating heavily when the body is least prepared, is one of the most underappreciated drivers of blood sugar dysregulation in this age group. Patricia was not doing anything wrong by conventional standards. She was doing everything wrong by chronobiology standards. I want to be honest with you. When I first started taking meal timing seriously, I thought the evidence for breakfast was mostly cultural, something we were told to believe because cereal companies funded the research. That skepticism turned out to be partly right and largely wrong. The issue isn't breakfast for its own sake. The issue is what your first meal does to your body's internal clock. A study published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism, conducted at the University of Adelaide in 2015, tested 2 groups of people with type 2 diabetes. Both groups ate the same foods and the same total calories. The difference was timing. One group ate a larger breakfast and a smaller dinner. The other group did the reverse, smaller in the morning, larger at night. After 12 weeks, the group with the larger breakfast showed a 20% greater reduction in blood glucose levels and required significantly less diabetes medication than the dinner-heavy group. That 20% difference came purely from timing. Here's why this happens biologically. When you eat your first meal of the day, your body sets something called a food entrainment signal. Think of it like resetting your internal clock. A real, substantial morning meal tells your pancreas, your liver, and your muscles. Today is starting. Prepare for metabolic work. They respond by becoming more insulin sensitive, more ready to absorb and process glucose efficiently. When that signal never comes, or comes too late, too light, those systems stay in a kind of low readiness state throughout the morning, and then when you eat heavily at night, they're caught underprepared. The practical implication of this is simple, but it cuts against a lot of modern habits. If you want better blood sugar control, your largest meal should be before 2 p.m. Your breakfast should contain real protein and some healthy fat, not just fruit or toast, and it should happen within 2 hours of waking. But I want to be careful here, because this is exactly where most people run into a wall. They hear, "Eat a real breakfast," and they say, "But I'm just not hungry in the morning." That's real, and it's actually a symptom, not a preference. It's a sign that your circadian clock has already drifted. The good news is, you can reset it. I'll walk you through how in a moment. But first, there's something happening in your evening eating pattern that most people have never had explained to them clearly. Here's the physiology that Patricia's case made concrete for me. Your liver has two jobs when it comes to blood sugar. During the day, when insulin is working well, the liver stores glucose as glycogen, holding it for later use. At night, especially after about 6 p.m., the liver starts to shift modes. It begins producing glucose on its own, a process called hepatic glucose output, to provide a steady supply of fuel during sleep when you're not eating. When you eat a large dinner at 8 or 9 p.m., you're adding glucose from food on top of glucose the liver is already producing. Your pancreas responds by releasing more insulin. But your muscle cells, which are the primary site for glucose absorption, are already winding down. They're in sleep mode. Their insulin receptors are less responsive, so the insulin has fewer places to put that glucose. The result? Blood sugar spikes more sharply than the same meal would have caused at noon. It stays elevated longer, and over time, that pattern, repeated night after night, trains your pancreas to work overtime, progressively weakening its capacity. A study from the American Diabetes Association found that people who consumed more than 33% of their daily calories after 6 p.m. had significantly higher HbA1c levels, the 3-month blood sugar average, compared to those who front-loaded their calories earlier in the day. And this was independent of total calorie intake? This is why Patricia's numbers never improved. Her dinner wasn't causing a spike she could measure the next morning. It was causing a slow, chronic elevation that showed up in her quarterly labs and nowhere else. The shift that changed everything for her was not dramatic. She didn't overhaul her diet. She moved her family dinner to 6 p.m. She made her lunch the largest meal of the day, and she had a very light evening snack, often just some walnuts and a small piece of cheese, if she was hungry by 8 p.m. Within 90 days, her HbA1c dropped by 0.8 points. Her doctor told her she was the most compliant patient he'd ever seen. And finally, her numbers were showing it. Now I want to talk about a strategy that has become one of the most researched tools in metabolic medicine over the last decade. It's called time-restricted eating. And I want to explain it carefully, because it's often misunderstood. Time-restricted eating does not mean starvation. It does not mean skipping meals or cutting calories. It simply means choosing a defined window, typically 8 to 10 hours, during which you eat all your meals and allowing the remaining 14 to 16 hours as a period of rest for your metabolic system. Here's what that rest period does that most people don't realize. During the hours when you're not eating, your insulin levels drop to their baseline. And when insulin drops, your body switches from storage mode to maintenance mode. It starts clearing damaged proteins from cells. It increases sensitivity to insulin for the next day. It reduces systemic inflammation. And it allows your pancreas to rest, something that, after years of overwork, can meaningfully improve its function. Researchers at the Salk Institute, led by Dr. Sachin Panda, published findings in Cell Metabolism in 2019 showing that adults with metabolic syndrome who followed a 10-hour eating window without changing what they ate reduced their blood sugar by 3%, reduced their blood pressure by 4%, and lost 3% of their body weight over 12 weeks. No calorie counting, no food restriction, timing only. For people over 49 managing prediabetes or type 2 diabetes, the key is not just the length of the window. It's when the window is placed. Earlier is better. A window that runs from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. produces better metabolic outcomes than one running from 11 a.m. to 9 p.m., even though they're both 10-hour windows. I had a patient, a retired teacher named Gerald, who came to me with fasting blood sugar consistently in the 115 to 120 range. His doctor had mentioned that medication might be coming. Gerald was not overweight, he was active. He just happened to eat his first meal around noon and his dinner at 8:30 p.m. each night. We shifted his window to 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. He ate 3 meals inside that window. He found the adjustment uncomfortable for the first 2 weeks. He'd get hungry around 7 p.m. and feel a little unsettled. But by week 3, his appetite had adapted. By week 8, his fasting blood sugar was 98. Same person, different window. That was the only change. But I want to be honest with you. Time-restricted eating is not the same for everyone. If you take insulin or certain blood sugar-lowering medications, shifting your meal window without adjusting your medication timing can be dangerous. This is not something to do without talking to your doctor first. I'll come back to that in a moment. There's one more strategy I want to share, and this is the one I see consistently overlooked, even by people who already understand meal timing at a basic level. It has to do with protein and when you eat it. When you eat protein early in the day, something specific happens in your gut. Protein stimulates the release of incretin hormones, particularly GLP-1 and GIP, which are chemical signals that tell your pancreas to produce insulin more efficiently in response to glucose. They also slow the rate at which food leaves your stomach, which means glucose enters your bloodstream more gradually, avoiding sharp spikes. Here's the critical detail. The effect of these incretin hormones is strongest in the morning and diminishes significantly by evening. A study published in Diabetes Care found that eating 30 grams of protein at breakfast reduced post-meal glucose spikes by 40% compared to eating the same protein at dinner. Same protein, different time, completely different outcome. What does 30 grams of protein at breakfast actually look like? 3 eggs, a cup of Greek yogurt, some cottage cheese with seeds, or a combination of these. It's not complicated, but it requires intention. The instinct for most people is to have a light morning meal, maybe toast or fruit or cereal, and save the protein for later. That instinct, at the metabolic level, is working directly against you. When I explained this to Patricia, her response was immediate. You mean breakfast was always the most important meal, just for the wrong reasons? In a way, yes. Let me bring everything together in a way you can actually use. Here is what the research consistently points to for people over 49 who want to use meal timing as a genuine tool for blood sugar control. First, eat a real breakfast within 2 hours of waking. Not coffee and a piece of fruit. Something that contains at least 25 to 30 grams of protein. Eggs, yogurt, cottage cheese. This sets your metabolic clock and primes your insulin response for the day. Second, make lunch your largest meal. Not your heaviest in terms of calories, but the most complete. If there's a time to have rice, bread, or a sweet potato, it's here. Your insulin sensitivity is at its peak in the early afternoon. Third, make dinner light and early, before 7 p.m. if possible. Soup, salad, a palm-sized portion of protein, some vegetables. Not a feast. not the emotional anchor of the day. Fourth, consider a 10-hour eating window. If you eat breakfast at 7 a.m., finish eating by 5 p.m. If that feels extreme, start with a 12-hour window and gradually narrow it. The goal is to give your metabolic system the extended rest it needs to restore insulin sensitivity overnight. Fifth, keep the late evening empty. If you're genuinely hungry after your eating window closes, a small handful of walnuts or a tablespoon of almond butter is enough to quiet hunger without significantly triggering insulin. Now I want to say something directly to you. Your body has not given up on you. The fact that blood sugar has been difficult to control does not mean you failed. It often means that one key variable, timing, was never addressed. And unlike medication, which works regardless of when you take it, your biology has a schedule. Work with it, and the same actions produce different results. I want to ask you one specific question before you close this video. Look at your last 3 days. What time was your largest meal? If it was consistently at dinner, at 7, 8, or 9 p.m., that one shift, moving your largest meal earlier, might be the single most powerful metabolic change you can make this month. Try it for 30 days, just 30 days, and keep a simple log, not of what you eat, but of when. Then look at your fasting blood sugar readings at the end of those 30 days and compare them to where you started. The numbers will tell you what the research already shows. One important note: if you are currently on insulin, sulfonylureas, or any medication that directly lowers blood sugar, please discuss any changes to your meal schedule with your physician or pharmacist first. Shifting when you eat without adjusting medication timing can cause hypoglycemia, and that is something to take seriously. In the comments below, I'd like to ask you to write just one number. What time is your usual dinner? Not a judgment, just awareness. And if there's something in this video that shifted how you think about timing, I'd genuinely like to know which part. If this kind of evidence-based, practically focused content is useful to you, consider subscribing. Not for the sake of numbers, but because this is a conversation worth continuing. There is more to cover, and much of it, like what we talked about today, is information that tends to stay in journals and specialty clinics rather than reaching the people who need it most. Your biology is not your enemy, but it does have a schedule, and now you know where to find it.